unfortunately, there's a whole culture of like, we've just accepted that you don't tell the truth at work. You don't tell the truth about what's going on for you because you don't want to be inconvenient. That's not what they want to hear. And there's almost just this, let's just keep things going. It's just easier this way. So we don't tell the truth. But if we told the truth, where truth is the most valued piece of what we're doing together, and you are safe to do that, and you are welcome to do that. And in fact, if you don't do that, you're not doing your job.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of The Process Fixer. I almost said The Process Mavens, and there's a reason for that, and you'll hear about that today on the show. Today, I have Tamara Kemper from The Process Mavens with me, and Tamara and I have known each other for about a year or so. We've been chatting a lot about process. She's a process expert as well, so I'm excited to have her on the show here today. All right, so today I've got Tamara Kemper with me from The Process Mavens. Tamara,
Hi,
welcome.
Thank
This is the
you.
first time we've done this on camera.
It is.
We've done it over lunch. We've done it over drinks,
That's
but we've
right.
never done it over camera. So welcome. Tell me a little bit about what is The Process Mavens.
So the Process Mavens, different from the Process Fixer.
Yes, it is.
Is dedicated to documenting processes.
Got it.
Mostly around getting everybody aligned on how we do things so that we can scale.
Got it.
So a lot of times it's for employee manuals, for just to kind of have clarity on your standard operating procedures. But we get all of that stuff that's stuck in your employees' heads, out of their heads, one clear picture of how we do things.
Nice. And so obviously, does that result in a process map? Does it result in an SOP? Does it result in video? What is it? What's the end outcome?
All of the above. Yeah.
Got
So
it.
usually we'll start with kind of roles, responsibilities, get clear on who all of these people are and what roles they fulfill and really what problems they solve for the business. But then we move pretty quickly to process mapping. So we do map core processes and we then create standard operating procedures inside of a software called Trainual and help them basically create new hire training for all of their people.
And let me just ask you this from a theoretical perspective or just a practical perspective. Do you find customers are going back to those regularly, or is it like archaeology where you have to blow the dust off it every 25 years?
Yeah. So a lot of times we get people who have come to us and they have all kinds of archaeology. They have artifacts from days long past that you can blow the dust off of.
Nice.
But
how you handle a fax machine, like how you deal with faxes and stuff. That's great. Yeah, we have lots of those too.
It's good stuff. They'll hand me like a binder, go, well, we have this. And I'm like, cool, let's just put that over
Start
here.
over again. Yeah, because even in the world of AI, and today I've had a number of guests talking about AI, and I have an AI company in the SOP space, which we and I should talk about off camera as well. But I think the world changes about every 6 months. Yeah. And it's interesting. We're getting ready to start a bigger engagement with a larger, well-known company here in town. And they were like, well, what's the end date of this project? Like, if we're going to go through all of our processes, when does this end? And I'm like, it ends the day you sell the business.
That's right.
And they were like, but so we have to make this investment every year. I'm like, well, yeah, if you find a way to document your processes and save millions of dollars, and every time we revisit them, we save millions of dollars, you tell me when you would want to stop. When do you want to stop saving the millions of dollars? Right. And they go, never. I'm like, that's the point. Everything changes.
Yes.
And we've seen this happen time and time again where companies are still operating. One of the stories I tell in one of my books is about a company that was printing out all of their emails and putting them in the slots for people like mail. Then people were writing notes on them, and they had 16 people then that would take those things, take those handwritten notes and type them back into email communication to customers. And when we ask why, they all referred us to the training manual, which showed a process for handling fax requests from customers, but the word fax had been crossed out and replaced with the word email. So think about that. That means 30 years ago, email came into the workplace and they said, well, how do we handle this? How do we train people on it? And somebody said, well, it's like an electronic fax. So just print it out and put it in the fax piles. So for the last 25 years, 30 years, they have printed out their emails and treated them like they were faxes. in that instance, we talk about it in one of the books, 16 full-time employees working in that department that we got down to 1 full-time and 3 part-time people by just showing them how to respond to emails. It's not a big deal. It wasn't hard training. They were all doing it in their regular lives. It was just for some reason at work, nobody ever updated the manual. And I think there's just so much waste inside organizations because of that. Do you see that as well when you're going into these companies?
We do. And I think the approach that we take, since our main focus is helping the business to become a business that does write things down.
Yes.
So I always liken it to almost like we're the personal trainer to help them get that muscle to be stronger.
Yeah, sure. That have to be a cadence of that.
Exactly. Because every business has processes.
Sure.
You have people doing things. You are delivering something to your client or your customer. You are getting money in return. You have processes.
Yeah.
But the trick is if you don't have a culture where you write things down and you regularly make sure that they're up to date, just like you said, that's where you get those inefficiencies. Yeah. And so we're supporting them with just that routine. It's the process. It's very meta. It's the process within the process.
It's the process of the process.
How do you maintain this stuff? How do you make sure, improvement, before you can even improve it, you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, see, we do this as well. We call that the happy path. We want to always get you to a happy path. But I have to document the bullshit you're doing right now.
That's right.
Where my business is a little different than yours, and we work in different areas, but we're finding ways to start collaborating is, when we do that original documentation, what we're exceptionally good at then is measuring what we call through flow, where we look at how much flows through that process. And then I send observers in to figure out how much time it takes. And the reason that's so important is, great example, right now we have a customer that we did this process with, we mapped everything out, and they told us we need to get some new software. Okay, we need to upgrade our software. That's the objective. So they said, can you help us do that? So we went and we mapped out the existing process. We timed it. We figured out exactly how many things went through it every day. What's the capability goal of the process? And then we discovered that we could remove multiple parts of the steps and change things, which reduced the time it took by 56%. Mm-hmm. So which process do you want to automate? The shitty old one that took, or do you want to automate this new one that's 56% less steps? They're automating the new one. Now, the huge advantage of that was I was able to walk into the boardroom and say, hey, look, you guys did this engagement with us. You paid all this money. Here's our findings. Here's what the software costs. Here's exactly dollars and cents how much money you're going to save. Or, listen, it's not all about eliminating people. How much more capacity your team is going to have to devote to these things. And the 10 open positions you have, you don't need to hire for those anymore. And just run the math and say, here's what it costs. Here's what you save a year. Do you want an extra $500,000 in distributions this year into your pocket, or do you not want those things? Guess how the vote went.
Yeah, it
was sort of unanimous. It was more about who got their hand up the fastest.
That's right.
And that is very important. And I talk about this a lot, and it's something you and I have never talked about, but it is part of our secret sauce. Is many times organizations build a process and they never go back and revisit it. Mm-hmm. And that's a real problem, because that means that as my organization grows, that process had to be scalable for it to work. I don't believe in that at all. We set what we call process capability goals. So when I create a process, I say this process can do, you do 800 widgets a day. This process is capable of doing 900. When it does 901, the whole damn thing falls apart. The whole business will stop because it's not capable of doing that. Mm. When you get to a little short of that, we have to come back to it and revisit it. Because if I didn't do that, then that means you've over-engineered. I had a person yesterday that I know where their revenue is. It's in the tens of millions. And he says, we built this system to do $1 billion a year. And I said, wow, you wasted a ton of cash, huh? And he's like, what do you mean? We could do $1 billion with it. And I'm like, so when will you do it? In the next 5 years, you'll do it? Well, it'll be about 10 years. Yeah. So technology is going to be the same 10 years from now everything's going to be this, you're going to be selling the same. And you could just see on his face, he was like, oh my God, we just we over-engineered this thing. We don't need to be ready to do $1 billion. We need to be able to do 50 million, then 75, then 100. And it's this concept of auditing process, like we audit financials. I did a speech to a bunch of CFOs here recently. And I'm like, when's the last time you audited time in your organization? It's just crickets. Everybody's auditing dollars on a balance sheet, but nobody's auditing processes. Nobody's auditing the time that it takes to get things done. And I think setting these process capability goals and being able to say, this is going to break at this point is really beneficial, because then you only build what you need at that moment in time.
Well, it's setting an expectation too. I find that a lot of founders or entrepreneurs, they want to figure out the formula and then just be like, done, we did it. We've done it, you guys.
Doesn't work that way.
And then just set it free and off, I don't know.
There's a thing called management, and management actually means that you have to get back in there and get your hands dirty.
That's right.
You cannot just build this thing. I mean, do you really think Walt Disney built Disney World and was like, well, we're done. Like, we don't need to maintain it or do anything because it's Disney World. No, there's a lot of things that happen on that back end that have to happen. And you have to constantly be improving upon those things. And when you don't, that's where all this shit gets into the process, and it just destroys the company.
Yeah. And I think it also, and one of the main ways it destroys the company is the people get absolutely crushed.
Yes.
Just crushed because they're trying to hold together the parts. I mean, I will admit this has happened in my own little business,
happens in
right?
my business
like
as
you
well.
reach that critical mass where you're like, oh wow, she's literally holding this together with her with mere force of will.
Yeah.
And you have to go, okay, something like we have to go back to the table. And there's just this beauty that comes from writing down what you're doing. You can see it. It's all of a sudden so clear, and you can't just brush the stuff under the rug anymore.
I say this all the time. I say, written documents, how do I say it? If written documents tell us how, financials tell us where, maps tell us how and when. And if there's anybody here, when you drove here today, did you write down a paragraph of instructions on how to get here?
I did not.
No. Did you use a map?
I used my phone.
Yeah. But did your map?
It did.
It used a map. So you navigated using a map to get here. Every person that's listening to this has a business that they have a destination they're trying to reach. And they're trying to do it without a map. Like, serious people, like, that's just dumb shit. Like, don't do that. Like, you would never. I talk about this recently, and I mentioned the blowing the dust off, and I love this because it really resonates with people. If you get back into the original, human beings, when civilization really got started, one of the key pieces was us being able to write things down on tablets that we could take other places. So that started with cuneiform, which is these clay tablets, and they stamp these things in. Archaeological record shows there's only two different types of cuneiform: maps and standard operating procedures. Those are the only two things. It's the only things that people thought to write down. They wrote down, here's how you find water, here's where you go hunting, here's how you get to the next city. All of those things would be important. And then the other, which are relatively comical, are usually rich merchants telling their sons, when you go to the city, don't visit the women down by the river. This guy's scales are really, sketchy. I mean, they're all, but when you look at that, you can laugh at them and you can go, oh, this is funny. These are rules. They're standard operating procedures.
Right.
Why is dad writing down, don't go to this merchant who has these scales? Why? Because dad got ripped off or somebody. So he's taking information and transferring it. And if you really look at where human beings started to create large organizations, it was because they had maps and they had SOPs. They knew how to do it, where to do it. Yep. Most of us in our businesses cannot do this. I did it the other day where I went in with an organization and we rolled out a 3-foot by 18-foot long roll blueprint in the middle of their conference room. And we said, here's how another company like you does it. And they stood there for an hour going, damn, that's a good idea. Wow, look at, we do that totally. Could we learn from this? Because maps tell us how to, they wanted to be who those, the one on the floor was a bigger organization than them. It was a more successful organization. And when they were able to look at their map, all of a sudden they were like, it's so simple to see what our problem is when you're looking at it on a map. You can see, Waze is really good at doing this. You know where the traffic. If Waze tells you, my wife can attest, if Waze tells you as a driver to go one direction and you go, I know better. If you have a spouse, they have the opportunity then to be like, see, Waze knows better than you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maps are important.
Maps are important. The other thing that I had a little laugh there for a minute. I used to teach 6th grade and we talked about cuneiform. So that just came up. But what you were saying about even the rules of where not to go and what to do, that's a big piece too that gets missed, especially for new employees. As you're bringing on new people, they don't know the unspoken rules. They're very literally unspoken.
Yeah, they are.
And so when you have expectations of how things work around here and how we communicate around here and like the vibe of, what happens in the break room or those kinds of things. I mean, you don't have to get crazy, but you can almost create for your new employees like, hey, here, just so you know, we want you to feel like you know how to play here and how to be successful. Yeah. So providing them with that and especially, what do the leaders expect from their team so that you can show up on day one and feel like, okay, I got this. I know I have everything in me to be able to win.
Yeah.
And I don't have to figure it out and watch the politics play.
And listen, being able to navigate it on a map. Mm-hmm. I showed you some rolled maps here before we turned the camera on. The one thing that's interesting about that, there's one in there that talks about a workshop that we do. It literally, if you can see it above each bubble, it tells you at what moment in time you should be at if you're on time or not. It says at this bubble, if you're doing this, it's 8:07. If you're doing this, it's 8:11. If you're doing this, it's 8:14. If you're not doing this at 8:17, you're going to have a real bad day because you're never going to hit the goal. And that's such a powerful thing. Sam Bradford that works on my team. One of the projects he's working on right now is we are mapping communication and culture for an organization. We're literally mapping the culture. Now, how do you map something that's not quantitative, that's not physical? Mm-hmm. Well, what we're saying is these are our mission, vision, and values. That's the amen. Here's the in the beginning. So we're telling the story about why those things are important. And then we're showing in their decision points to say, the customer asked for this. Does that align? Like what should your decision be when a customer asks for that? Is it okay to say no there? Why is it okay to say no? You have permission to say no because doesn't align.
That's right.
It's not going to get us to the right destination. So I'm really big on this whole thing. And it's actually funny. My director's here right now. We're talking about this new show where all we do is just bring people together and map out something. And it could be anything. You could call in on the show and be like, my girlfriend and I are having a bad time. Let's map it. Where are we trying to get to? Where do we start? Where are we trying to get to? Because there's power in that opportunity. I think the other thing that's so powerful with maps that people don't realize is that when I read a document, we're all reading this separately. We're all holding up this document and reading it. When you stand at a process map, and we saw this happen the other day at a client, we rolled this thing out on the floor and they stood shoulder to shoulder and analyzed it. There is a power in shoulder to shoulder analysis versus being on Zoom, looking at somebody face. It's interesting that face to face is the way that we do most of our communication, but it is the way that we do most of our confrontation as well. Shoulder to shoulder, if you and I are moving this table together, we have to be on the same team. We don't have a choice because if you lift your end higher than I lift mine, we're going to have a mess. So that ability to sort of stand there shoulder to shoulder and work on something together and lift it together and build it together is super powerful from a psychological perspective.
Absolutely. And I'm even thinking about sessions I've led virtually where we're mapping processes and you see the exchanges.
Yep.
You see that almost like there's this moment of pulling back and disconnecting, and you've lost that person.
You've lost it.
Whereas when you're in the room, it's so much easier to pull them back in. It's so much easier to and also the other people are seeing their energy and seeing what's going on in the room. And so, it's a really beautiful thing to get everybody together.
We had an instance here recently where we created a map with the team, and then they went through and told us where all the bottlenecks were and all their pain points were. And they put all those out. And then we said, well, we have to rank these now because there's a really interesting thing about the word priorities. And that is that it didn't exist until about 50 years ago. The word has always been priority. There was never a plural of that word until about 50 years ago when some guru decided, well, it's way easier to say, here's the 3 things you need to do versus the 1 thing you need to do. But that word in the English language always was singular. There was no plural to it. It was, this is your priority. So we asked the people there to prioritize and figure out what was the most important bottleneck in the business. And there was a very emotional exchange between a couple of people. But being able to stand there and see that person in the eye and realize how that pain affected them, very quickly the team went, that's number 1.
Yeah.
Like, mine's important, mine's urgent. That's going to kill her if we can't get this fixed. So you can't do that on Zoom. It's really hard to get people to like have that deep interaction and relationship and be able to see somebody's body language and see how it's affecting them. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, it's like there's a tension that's created that's like a little pressure cooker that you've created. And I think that's necessary to get through to the other side, because I think it's really easy, especially when you have departments that maybe don't interact, a lot. It's very easy to make them the other and to go like, well, they don't get it. They, they're that way. Yeah. Because of course your 2 different departments are made up of people with different sets of talents to get those specific things done. And then to your point, when you bring those people together, it's like, oh, right, we're humans.
Yeah.
And I didn't get it. I didn't get the depth of what this situation was for you. I didn't see it. I thought you were being difficult. I thought you were just being stubborn.
I didn't understand. Yeah.
I didn't get it. And so you can have those conversations. And as a facilitator for myself, I find half of the work, well, maybe not half, but a good chunk of the work is just holding space for people to have those hard conversations. It's a novel enough situation with a third party there that you can bring those surfaces. It's almost like people see this as their chance.
Yeah, and you can be a referee a little bit. Yeah,
exactly,
you're so right.
Exactly.
I got to tell you, I've seen this happen time and time and time again when you're doing process work with teams. Somebody will bring something up and we'll just say something, well, how long has that been happening? And I just had an instance here recently where this person brought up a very serious issue in the company. And we were like, how long have you observed this? How long has this been happening? And she's like, well, I've been here 20 years. Yeah, I guess it's been the full 20 years I've worked here. And you could just see the executives in the back of the room like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like 20 years and she never had an opportunity to bring this up. And I'm like, yeah, because you never gave her space where she could bring it up, where she was comfortable bringing up, where it fit. You didn't have this workshop. Right. And you have to do that. You really do. You
do. And I think that there are just certain archetypes of people who are literally never going to bring it up. Like that's part of it. Yep. It's like, unless 100%. You explicitly,
ask for it.
Ask this specific thing and they're just never going to. And then I also think, unfortunately, there's a whole culture of like, we've just accepted that you don't tell the truth at work. You don't tell the truth about what's going on for you because you don't want to be inconvenient. You don't want to be, that's not what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And there's almost just this, let's just keep things going. It's just easier this way. So we don't tell the truth. But if we told the truth all the time, which, I mean, listen, that's a fantasy world. It's not going to happen. Sure. But I think starting at a place where we're saying like, this is a space, we're walking into this work together.
Yeah.
And this is a space where truth is the most valued piece of what we're doing together. And you are safe to do that, and you are welcome to do that. Yeah. And in fact, if you don't do that, you're not doing your job.
Yeah. I think that's
making that really clear.
It's such a powerful thing. We talk about it, the Process Fixer, and I think we've even done an episode talking about this concept of unvarnished truth, where we say, look, we will bring truth into your organization, but I am adamant with my people that we don't want to paint the stool. Like if we're bringing a table in, we don't know what your decor is. So all we can do is build the structure and function and the legs and make sure the function is there. You have to form it. You have to put it into the room and say, okay, number one, does this fit? Like, does it fit into the space that I have for it? Yeah, okay. It makes sense. There's a lot of data behind it. You know what? But it would look a lot better if we put our brand on it, if we put our logo on it, if we changed it around a little bit. So we're really big on that, of this concept of giving you the truth unvarnished, because it's important for you to then take it and make it your own. And sometimes with CEOs and executives, it's better to do that. Just say, here's the data. And they look at it. And a great example, we talk about process maps. One of our other techniques that we do is we do calendar audits for companies. We just recently did one where we took everybody's Outlook calendar for 90 days and we analyzed it and we put it on a heat map.
Oh, man.
And then we show who meets with who, and we put it, when we roll them out in these big, huge rolls. And it was really interesting because I immediately pointed out a few things where I was like, interesting. This department always meets with this department and nobody else. This department always meets with legal. And this department never meets with legal. I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know the answer to what that means, but it should be a question that you ask. But very quickly, multiple people were like, look, and in some instances, I pointed them out from sort of a negative connotation. I'm like, this could be a risk. And they're like, yeah, but legal's expensive. Maybe we shouldn't have legal in as many. Like they inverted it and said, well, wait a second, maybe there's a lesson to be learned here that's bigger than that. But again, you can't see that until it's laid out on the table and you go, well, wait, 96% of the time, marketing meets with sales. Well, okay, that makes logical sense. Is that too much? Like, should more voices be in that conversation, or should be less voices in the conversation? So it is just about visualizing this. And I think visualization of data is becoming a really big thing. There's a lot of movement around geospatial and three-dimensional looking at data, but we're doing that with written documents. Wouldn't you think you'd do it with an actual freaking map, like a topographical map of your organization that says, here's the peaks and valleys and here's what's happening. And when when rain falls here, it floods the valley. And understanding that, I think, is such a big piece.
Do you find that the employees as well are able to pretty readily understand the data that's visualized in those maps?
They are.
Yeah.
Because it's giving language to what they already know. I think this is one of the things that's super cool. And I write about this in my book, Adapt Agility. The limbic system, which we use way more than we think. I mean, we are animals in the end. The limbic system not only has no power of speech, it is not connected to the language parts of your brain. Meaning that when somebody says, I have an intuition or I have a feeling, or they're just like, I don't know about that person. That's literally their limbic system, their fight, flight, freeze, or fawn system, actually giving them information, but they can't vocalize it. It's not possible for them to vocalize it because there's no connection there in the brain. So many times when you provide that data like that and people can see it, they go, I knew that. I knew that something wasn't right there, but I couldn't say it. So when you make it colors and you make it something that they can see, very quickly, they're able to actually bring that visual is able to connect the language part of their brain to the limbic part of their brain and say, my gut feeling was right. I just didn't know how to say it, but that proves it.
It must be very empowering to be, to just be able to know that, yes, like that they are the experts. They are the ones that know, and to show that to their leadership. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, that people talk about women's intuition. People talk about intuition in certain things. We've all had situations where we're like, I don't know, but we don't know why. And sometimes that goes away over time. Like our fears are, I talk about this in the book, sometimes you see the person coming over the horizon and you go, well, is that a friend or foe? Well, then you realize they have clubs and they have an angry face. Okay. Or as they get closer, you go, oh no, actually they're bringing me food.
Right.
This is okay. So it's okay for that instinct to initially be one thing and then for it to move in another direction. But you can't do that until you can visualize it. And it's funny, I just went through this process with a company where the CEO told me one thing and then we brought the employees in and we mapped it out. And the CEO was like, I'm in the wrong room, right? Because this can't be my company. And I'm like, brother, this is your company.
Yep.
And he's like, I'm just shocked that I was that out of touch. And I'm like, yeah, but the problem is the reason you're out of touch is because you aren't physically removing your ass from your seat every day and going out to where the work is done. You're in a boardroom, you're on a plane, you're meeting with clients, you're working on the business, not in the business. And I've been talking a lot about this, and I know that I've gotten some people that are like, well, that flies in the face. I say this, I'm like, look, if you're working on the business, not in the business, that means that you've let the details to somebody else. There's a guy with horns and a tail that like loves to live devil's in the details, right? So you've essentially turned over all of that part of your business to someone who doesn't have your best interest in mind. So many times we focus so much on the on that we never actually get into the in. And that's what process is all about. It is about looking at the in strategically. I'm not saying that you have to be in your business every single second of every single day, but you should not be on your business every single second of every single day.
Yeah, you need transparency into what's going on. So that doesn't mean you're working in it, but you need to be able to clearly see. And I think that's often a pain point that people bring to me is like, I just feel like I can't see it. I can't see what's going on. And of course, when you start your business, it's just all hands on deck. Everybody's doing different things and you're just getting it done, and you hire good people who can just help you get to where you're going. And that works for a really long time until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then at some point you do have to let go. And I think it is difficult to know, like, what is the balance? How much do I let go? How much do I trust in that person I put maybe as a second command to take it and run with it? And I don't think that there's a perfect right answer, but bringing in an expert to show you, like, to do that analysis, help you see what is true. What is actually happening in your business. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just being able to come in, I don't know if it's quarterly or 6 months, and just be able to touch it, look at it, adjust, and step back out.
I mentioned the word audit before. You don't audit your financials every day.
Right.
You audit your financials every quarter or every year, and you usually hire a third party to come in alongside you and let them lead, because you don't know what to look for, right? And I love it. I've run some publicly traded companies, and the auditor usually comes in, they start doing some work, and then they say, okay, I want to see these 19 files. And then you got to go find them. Now, listen, they're not the 19 I would have picked. Why? Because they somehow tend to pick the 19 where you're like, oh man, I don't know where that is. We ain't got the receipts, you know? So there's a piece to that of having a third party, having an expert come in and say, let's go for a process walk. Let's go for a Gemba walk. Let's walk your floor. Let's see what's happening down there. Let me point out some things to you that you should be looking at. And then you can go back to your perch. But we call this at Process Fixer perspectives, not periscopes. You know, if you're looking through a telescope or you're looking through a periscope on a submarine, you have a very limited view of what is happening. You got to get other perspectives. You know, I think if you think about that, like from a military perspective, you know, there's a reason they use aerial photography and drones and all these other things, because when you're in it, you can't see it. Right. So you've got it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't get in it, but you got to have data. You have to have analysis. You have to have the right imagery. You got to have the topographical maps. You have to have the process maps to be able to navigate it.
And I've worked with some very, I would call them process smart CEOs. And even they can't do it because there's amazing. Too much. I think it's also like there's just too much attachment. Yeah. There's too much ego. There's too much self-worth potentially wrapped up in, oh God, how could I let that go? Like that was right in front of me. So you almost need that external person just to be able, so you can really see the truth. And
I tell CEOs this all the time in closing. I tell CEOs, I'm like, do you cut your own hair? And everybody goes, no. Like, unless they're the bald guy. And then he's like, yeah, of course I do. Most people don't cut their own hair because, number one, you have to look through these, which is the worst perspective to actually cut your own hair. But then you got to look in a mirror and get a reverse image back. Like I'm doing it here. I'm looking at myself in the monitor and I'm going, I want to touch the right side of my head. Okay, wait a second. This is not, that is actually, like, you know what I mean? You can't. So number one, you can't get the right elevation on it. You can't get the right visual on it. You're limited in your scope. You're stuck in this periscope. It's just way easier to have somebody else do it or at least guide you through it. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a bad haircut. And, you know, nobody wants to be the person that shows up with the big chunk out of the front or back of their hair.
Nobody knows. And nobody wants that. And we all kind of know when we do too.
We do,
it's
don't we?
Oh, I just feel like something's off.
I love there's this old episode of Leave It to Beaver where the Beav loses his money to get his haircut and he comes to his brother Wally and he says, "Can you cut my hair so I don't get caught?" And Wally begins to cut his hair and the Beav says, "You know, are you done yet?" And he said, "No, but I think I better stop." And I'm like, that's the best line ever. It's like, "Are you done messing with your process yet?" "No, but I think I better stop." So thank you so much for being here. How do people find you?
Oh, well, my website is theprocessmavens.com.
Excellent.
And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me there. And
thanks for being here. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for joining us on another edition of The Process Fixer. Make sure you like and subscribe.
You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Process Fixer. Help you see the bigger picture. Derrick Maines is the elixir, cutting waste away like scissor. Woo! Got a problem, he can solve it. He's an expert with the process, so for sure you'll see a profit. Bottom line profit. Analyze the work your people doing every day. Expose the inefficiencies getting in the way. Advise you how to automate, outsource, abbreviate, eliminate, innovate. Now there's more food up on your dinner plate.